after hearing all this, you're happy?
Yeah.
You should be pissed off. Excuse me, ticked off. Good for the audience. I'm going to be a bit of a time Nazi here, or maybe I should say time jihadist, to just sort of give us a topic. I've got a fatwa on time. Gotta laugh. Otherwise. What I'd really like to do here, because this is a critically important thing, and the organizers here at Maryland Citizens Action Network have given us a lot of time for this topic, and rightly so, because not only is it critically important for our communities, our families, our churches, our schools, our states, it's critically important for our nation, and frankly, Western civilization. So how about that? Is Anne the only one here yet? Oh, hey. As you heard, Jim is going to be here in a minute. So, welcome to the Gaffney family reunion. See, I got better laughs than I thought on that one. Each of our guests are affiliated with the Center for Security Policy, which is a critically important organization doing critically important work. Can I just tell you a quick anecdote about the people on this panel? For those of you who don't know, I worked with Andrew Breitbart pretty early on in the Breitbart world. I was the 7th person hired. We were still working in Andrew's basement when I was hired. All right? And that was before it was Breitbart News Network, which sounds, I gotta get James to go, this is BNN, right? It was big Hollywood, and then we added big government, and then we added big journalism, and then Breitbart News. And anyway, early on, there was a congresswoman out of Minnesota who was getting attacked on television a lot. Her name was Michelle Bachmann. And Andrew saw that you had gone to some Tea Party events. And if you know Andrew, you know that he quickly jumped on and thought, why are they making fun of and calling horrible names to Tea Party members? And so he loved the Tea Party and the people who were in the Tea Party groups, and like any congressperson who was willing to affiliate themselves. And he asked me to start doing some writing and say, listen, they're really attacking this person, and I think that they're wrong, and I want you to be able to write some things to sort of counter the narrative that they're saying about Michelle Bachmann. And I said, well, okay, do we know enough about her, though? I mean, Andrew, if you assign yourself to her and start defending her and put your brand there, you know, if there is a problem with this woman, then that's going to damage your brand. And he said, I don't care what she stands for. All of the right people hate her. It was so simple. And when you do a quick search on the people who are on this panel, all of the right people hate you. I shouldn't say hate, because who knows what's in their heart. But all of the right people fear your message. All of the right people are angry about what you're about to hear, and that tells me that they're telling the truth. Because all of the right people are saying terrible things about them. These are courageous people that you're about to hear from, talking about, as we've learned, is something that is happening right now, this minute in our country, about refugee resettlement and the national security concerns. And there are national security concerns, but there are also concerns with our culture and what our schools will be like and how this affects your children and grandchildren on a day-to-day basis. And as I always like to say, what happens in your house is more important than what happens in the White House. Yes, they go hand in hand, but ultimately what your kids are dealing with every day at school is really going to affect what happens here, and that's your kids are being affected by this policy. Okay, now here we are, so we can start with the introduction. I'm hoping maybe like 5 to 10 minutes each, and then we can do, no, 15 minutes each. 15? Okay, 15 minutes each. Only because I hate that moment when there are 8 more people lined up for questions. And that, last year I was proud to host the panel on the border and border concerns. And well, we saw how Donald Trump took that ball and ran with it, so you're welcome, America. But we had so many people who still wanted to talk, so I just want to express it. I am worried about that, but we're going to be good if I just shut the hell up. So let's start with Claire Lopez, if we could. Yeah. Oh, okay. So let's. I don't know what the hell I'm doing here. Okay. So if we could, as I had already planned, let's start with Ann Corcoran. Corcoran, excuse me. who, first of all, incredibly educated person, went to all the right schools, but the problem is she started a little blog called Refugee Resettlement Watch, and suddenly she's, you know, a know-nothing. She's racist, she's horrible. It doesn't matter what your education is, it doesn't matter what your background is, as soon as you start, you know, speaking truth to power and talking about the reality of what's going on in our country, I'm sorry for dwelling on all the horrible things that people say about you, but I think it's important that we confront that because it shows you the courage that Anne has, and she's ours. She's Maryland's own, and she is Yes, thank you. Let me move my
Thank you so much.
coffee.
I want to go first because I hate to speak. I'm a nervous wreck. If I had to sit through Claire, I would probably have a heart attack. And I want to say that I helped get Maryland Can started. Jim.
It was your idea.
Well, it was Tanya and Jim, though, who stuck with this and turned this into a fabulous event. So give everybody, please give everybody. You already know how I got to this point, right? But for those who don't, in 2007 in Washington County, I simply wanted to know how could a church group, the Virginia Council of Churches, bring a couple hundred refugees to Hagerstown and pretty much drop them off. In fact, we first noticed them, the refugees, when it became evident that the Virginia Council of Churches wasn't even taking very good care of them. The Hagerstown Herald-Mail hadn't said much about the arrival of mostly impoverished Turkish Russians and a few Africans until there was an incident. And this is how the incident came about. There was an African refugee who was very ill. She lived in a slum apartment where she had been placed by the Virginia Council of Churches in downtown Hagerstown. She sent a child who didn't speak any English out on the street knocking on doors looking for help because she was ill. There was language confusion. The fire and rescue department got the idea that she had Ebola. They brought in a hazmat unit and shut down the street. They evacuated the building. All of this was because the Virginia Council of Churches didn't answer the telephone when the poor woman called looking for help. So the Hagerstown Herald-Mail, which was avoiding this topic now, was forced to have to talk about refugees. To make a long story short, I just wanted to know what was the governmental process that allowed this to happen? Who told the Virginia Council of Churches that they could drop off impoverished refugees into a Maryland county? So I dug in and began investigating with the help of some others in our county, including my good friend Judy, who's here today. And eventually we published what we were finding to a new blog called Refugee Resettlement Watch. I could never have imagined then that I would still be digging up information 8 years later, and that the subject of refugees would be on everyone's lips, including all the mainstream media, talk radio, as 2015 came to a close, and as the rumors were flying that 100,000 Syrian refugees would soon be on the way to America. Now here we are, at the beginning of 2016, and although I'm still advocating for everyone to look into how the Obama administration has been working diligently to seed, and they actually use the word seed, communities with migrants from the third world through myriad legal programs and with the added help of large illegal migrant flow from the southern border, I want to emphasize we must direct our energy at one primary goal this year. Obama is truly changing America as he promised. He is swapping you for what they euphemistically call new Americans, once more suited to his liking. But he's leaving office, and if we don't turn this ship around, or start to turn it around this year, I believe we are doomed. By 2020, the migration that involves tens of thousands of Muslim migrants to America will be so far down the road where demands for Sharia compliance throughout the education system, local government, and the legal system will virtually be irreversible. I'm going to argue that you put much of your other good work on issues aside just for a little while and focus on immigration and election 2016. It is all that matters. This is no normal election year. Once the demographic makeup of America is changed, You will never get your concerns addressed on Obamacare, Common Core, gun rights, and so forth. The new Americans will be in lockstep, as immigrants have always been, with the Democrats, because they are the dispensers of welfare goodies. In large numbers, they are never going to vote to make government smaller or to cut off their own benefits. Now to Maryland for a few minutes of refugees. Like the building contractor who never quite finishes his wife's new kitchen, I've been remiss in keeping up with Maryland and refugees, except for a few hot stories about Baltimore and how the unhappy African Americans there don't exactly warm up to the diversity the federal resettlement contractors have deposited in that city. Here's some numbers. In the last 10 years, Maryland has received 10,784 refugees, in addition to thousands of other legal and illegal immigrants. And by the way, you don't have to write all these numbers down. I have a handout you can see later for you. The lowest year was 2006, with only 617 refugees seated in Maryland, but by 2015 they were up to 1,453. And just so you know, this was all happening in the Bush years as well. Top resettlement cities were Baltimore and Silver Spring. But I was surprised to see that at least 55, I got sick of counting them, 55 other towns and cities in Maryland welcomed refugees. Baltimore received refugees from 37 countries, and Mayor Stephanie Rawlings-Blake thinks the diversity will bring Baltimore strength. The angry African-American rioters did not see it that way, as they directed looting toward immigrant-run stores, and that was reported by the New York Times in those most recent riots. Rawlings-Blake also invited the Muslim Brotherhood-affiliated charity Islamic Relief to join her in cheering the Muslim influx from places like Iraq, Somalia, Uzbekistan, Burma, and Syria. Mayors like Rawlings-Blake need to watch their backs, because one goal of the Muslim Brotherhood in America is to ultimately become a political force by winning mayoral seats. As a matter of fact, one of my earliest posts at Refugee Resettlement Watch was one about Frederick, Maryland Imam Yaha Hendy's pronouncement to a Saudi audience in the summer of 2007 that there would be 30 Muslim mayors in America by 2015. 30 Muslim mayors in America by 2015. Hendy's no small fish. He's presently the Muslim chaplain at Georgetown University. But he got a little ahead of himself, didn't he, with that prediction? But here's the part that troubles me. If one is a moderate Muslim, not concerned with promoting Sharia law in America, why does it matter what religion the mayor is? Let me repeat, if one is a moderate Muslim, not concerned with promoting Sharia law in America, why does it matter what religion the mayor is? Imagine now for a minute, let's have a little laugh, if Donald Trump said, I want 30 Presbyterian mayors in America, or God forbid, 30 Jewish mayors in America by a set date. Just imagine the field day the media would have with that. As far as I could tell, no one ever said boo about Hendy's boastful comment. Anyway, back to Maryland. There are 5 federal resettlement contractors operating in the state. They receive payment by the head to resettle refugees, but they also receive millions of other federal grants and in many states, state contracts to do their supposedly charitable work. It's good that our Governor Hogan stood up against the resettlement of Syrians into Maryland until there was some assurance by the Department of Homeland Security that they would be screened. There will be no assurance, and they're coming anyway. The FBI has testified that they cannot be screened because there is no data to access about who they are. They come from a failed state. Obama says he wants 10,000 chosen by the United Nations in America by the end of the fiscal year, which ends September 30th. But they're off to a really, really slow start, and that's good. The contractors, including the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, say they want 100,000 by the end of the fiscal year. The feds have only managed to get 674 in here so far, but 99% of them are Muslims. This is not about saving the Christians. And at that rate, they would only get 2,696 here instead of the 10,000 Obama promised. Maryland's in the top 10 receiving states for Syrians. As of December 31st, 44 Syrians have been resettled in Maryland, with 30 of those going to Baltimore. I'm guessing it's slow due to a couple reasons. One is the security screening we already talked about, and what Canada is finding out. The new Prime Minister Trudeau promised 25,000 Syrians to be resettled in Canada by December 31st. The December 31st is already passed. And fell very short of that. He got less than 6,000. Because they're finding, guess what? Most Syrians in camps in places like Jordan want to go home. As Governor Hogan and other Republican governors are finding, Senator Ted Kennedy and the gang who wrote the Refugee Act of 1980 made sure there was no local control over the program. So when the governor says he can't legally do anything, well, he's sort of right. However, just because it's a law does not mean it's constitutional, and no one has ever tested that. So while we wait for that constitutional test, my recommendation for Marylanders is to press the governor to do a complete review of the program in Maryland, look into its finances, see where state funds are expended, examine the program's transparency and accountability to local government, and find out if there are some industries or the Chamber of Commerce quietly pushing for a supply of cheap labor behind the scenes. There is no law that says the governor can't set up a panel to investigate all angles of this federal program operating in Maryland. He could even hold hearings around the state. How's the time?
You're looking good. You got about 4.5.
Good. Your job, if you can convince the governor to do such a study, is to make sure it's not rigged. So back to my opening remarks. This year, you must get involved in election 2016. This is the most, I believe this with all my heart, this is the most important election since our founding. This is the year we say Western civilization or not. It is that serious. I think we readily saw how the omnibus funding bill debacle unfolded, and it's pretty clear that even some of those supposedly on our side are not, even here in Maryland. We must elect a president who will fearlessly roll back Obama's destructive measures. And it's past time to send a message loud and clear to spineless and donor-driven Republicans at all levels of government. We aren't going to tolerate it anymore. We work hard to get you elected, and you roll over to mainstream media demands and the financial donors' demands, and it's despicable. I'll leave it there. Hopefully we'll have time for questions, and I have a few copies of a handout with some numbers for you. But because I think this year is so important and bigger than the refugee issue alone, I want to be writing about it, so I have a new blog I want to tell you about called American Resistance 2016. It's about the election and immigration, because that is all that matters. Western civilization is all that matters. I'll be exposing all those who are working to change America through immigration on both the political left and the right. You might be interested in my little book, published by the Center for Security Policy Press, called Refugee, Resettlement, and the Hijra to America. Thank you so much, and see me over lunch for my handout.
And by the way, that 1980 Ted Kennedy Refugee Act, there's also a thing in 1989 called the Lautenberg Amendment. You know, when the presidential discussion happened about the Syrian refugees, and I remember a couple of candidates said, well sure, let's bring in the Syrian refugees, let's just bring the Christians in. And none of the Muslim refugees, and I believe our president said, that's not who we are. Go ahead and look at the Lautenberg Amendment, 1989, and I'm sure your lefty friends at work and on Facebook put that, that's not who we are, don't be discriminate against religions. Lautenberg Amendment, 1989, Frank Lautenberg, Democrat, New Jersey, specifically puts in criteria to our refugee program about identifying religious minorities and giving them precedence and giving them priority. It's been used mostly for Jewish refugees from Russia. But there's nothing wrong with our government setting aside priority for certain religions who are being persecuted. And I don't know who's being persecuted in Syria these days more than anyone else. All right.